Hello and welcome to another Play Better Chess video. So this is part 2 on how to improve your chess with Paul Morphy. So I definitely recommend taking a look at Paul Morphy chess games. He was kind of the first unofficial world chess champion, and he was considered that after winning in a match against Adolf Anderssen, who was probably the best or one of the best players in the world at the time. Now, there was Howard Staunton, who was also considered an unofficial world chess champion, and Morphy tried to get a match with Howard Staunton, but Staunton was kind of past his prime, and he seemed to avoid Morphy, try to avoid a match with Morphy, probably knowing that he would lose because Morphy was a very powerful player, probably the best in the world. Well, I would say definitely the best in the world at this time, and also considered one of the best chess players in history. So here we have this game being played in 1857, I believe it was, and 90.9% accuracy for Morphy, 83% for his opponent, Adolf Anderssen. And Morphy had one great move. Inaccuracies, it looks like 2 by Morphy, 5 by his opponent, but 3 mistakes. And Morphy played at a 2650 level versus 2300 by his opponent. All right, let's take a look at the analysis here. Also, yes, this game was played in 1858, okay, and Paris, France was where this match took place. Okay, Morphy with the white pieces, he plays e4. Now, how can you improve your chess with games of Paul Morphy? Go over them yourself and try and guess the moves that Morphy would make before you look at them. That can definitely help. And then once you see how the moves or what moves were made, try and figure out how that move, how he decided to make that move and why. So here we have e4. e6 is played. This is the French defense. Now, if you guess that Morphy is going to play this d4 move, why would he play that? Well, if your opponent is going to give you the center, which is one of the most important areas of the board, then why not place both pawns there? And if you let your opponent place a pawn in the center, well, you need to start, both pawns, you need to start attacking. You can do that by pushing this pawn to d5. Here, Anderssen, who is known as a great attacking player, here he decides to fianchetto the bishop and try and go after the pawn, or target the center. Morphy just develops a bishop, which is interesting, and it says this is a missed opportunity, that immediately h4 would be the best move here. Perhaps threatening to push forward and open up the h-file by capturing here, maybe, after this pawn just keeps pushing all the way up. But Morphy, known for trying to get his pieces developed quickly, he brings a bishop out. His opponent does likewise and targets this unprotected pawn. So the other bishop is developed. Morphy always trying to get pieces developed quickly. Now, this is a mistake, apparently. d5 would have been better, but you don't want to go after this pawn because then this bishop can move down here, picking off a pawn and targeting the rook. So this is played pawn to c3, fortifying the center. And all right, apparently, now this is where the computer comes in handy. So go over these games and try and figure things out in your head, and then use the computer afterwards to see what you miss. It looks like the best move is to actually here, after this, apparently that is the best move. Because if bishop captures, well then what do we have? Let's see, knight up to d2. And so here knight to e7 is best, keeping the bishop. Because if you capture, well then the queen can recapture and white is actually ahead, even though white is behind the equivalent of 2 pawns. Because now you're targeting the rook. F6 blocks that attack. And now what do we have? Knight to c4, threatening to jump in the center. So here we would have kind of 4 pieces developed, and his opponent would have no pieces developed. So you don't want to go into that line. So apparently that's why you could have just taken this pawn. But Morphy centralizes. So after capture, recapture, keeping pawns in the center equal, 2 pawns versus 2. But Morphy, he's a little bit ahead in development here. So now we have an attack on the pawn. Morphy jumps his knight up here to help defend, and his opponent develops a knight also. So after castle, an inaccuracy, apparently just immediately developing the other knight would have been better. Both sides are castled, and the knight jumps up there now, and white has the edge here. 0.59 in the lead. All right, d5, the best move. Keeping the pawns equal in the center, but what does Morphy do here? He pushes forward, gaining space. So space in the center, and generally the direction that your central pawns are aiming is the direction you want to attack in. So for black, it looks like it would be better for black to attack on the queen side over here. Maybe jump this knight forward, funnel his pieces down in here, and start trying to create some kind of threats. Use the open C file. But Morphy, his pawns are aiming towards the king side, and he should direct his attack in that direction. All right, so we have f6 being played, and this pawn jumps forward, the best move, so that if the central pawn is captured, this flank pawn can recapture. And so that's what happens in the game. And now the F file is open along with the C file. And in an opening, you want to get your knights developed quickly, then your bishops, then move your queen and connect your rooks. So what does Morphy do here? His opponent wastes time with this move, trying to keep pieces out of b5, prevent a knight from jumping forward and then landing on this outpost. So that's probably what Anderson was trying to prevent. So the queen moves up, creating a battery. This is a good move, but apparently trading off the rooks here might have been better. Because then if the queen captures, the other rook that's not doing anything could swing over here, attacking the queen, driving the queen away, and giving Morphy... the other queen would have been in the way here if that was played. So yeah, this queen would have been in the way. But the queen could move up, and then there would be the threat of bringing the other rook over, attacking the queen. All right. So this is a good strategy as well. You create a queen-bishop battery, threaten to move over here and exchange the bishops, creating dark squared weaknesses around the king. So the knight jumps forward here, attacking the bishop, trying to knock out Morphy's bishop pair. He ignores that and just places his bishop on g5, pinning the knight. So capture, recapture, the bishop is developed, and the queen jumps over, kind of lining up on the king side. That way this pawn cannot push forward and chase the bishop away. And the queen is also, maybe targeting this pawn in the future if this knight is no longer protecting it. or excuse me, this bishop is no longer protecting the pawn. All right, queen slides over, creating a battery of his own. And now we have Morphy maneuvering a knight over towards the king side, because usually one or two pieces are not enough to conduct a successful attack against your opponent's king. So Morphy starts trying to maneuver the pieces in that direction. So we have an exchange, queen captures, and this activates the other rook with tempo, because now the queen has to move, and the rook is in a good open file position here, controlling this file. And it also gives Morphy time to continue here with whatever he decides. So, checks, captures, and threats are what you want to look at before you make your move. So, if we go back here, any checks? Well, queen could capture this pawn, but it would be sacrificed for nothing. The king would just capture. So then you want to look to see if there are any unprotected pieces. It looks like they're all protected. Any unprotected pawns over here, but there's no way to get to that at the moment. So then you want to see if you can create any threats, and that's what Morphy does, playing a great move here, creating this battery, threatening to capture the knight here. So the knight jumps forward, attacking the queen, but this is an inaccuracy. Apparently, knight to the queen side would have been better. Maybe trying to put some pressure over here in the future. But the knights are exchanged after a recapture towards the center. Now, if you have an option, it's usually better if you have an option to capture away from the center or towards the center. Usually towards the center is better. Here, this isolated pawn is left and could be an endgame weakness. But the pawn is captured towards the center, keeping all these pawns together, blocking the path of the rook that was on this open file. So Morphy lifts the rook up, getting ready to swing over maybe here, and targeting this h-pawn. So this move is an inaccuracy, and now Morphy is ahead by plus 3.3 here. So this is ignored, this bishop move, and instead of bringing the rook here with a threat on this pawn, the rook lines up on the king and bishop here. You know, perhaps with the threat of dropping the bishop in here and, you know, having just more pressure added to this bishop. Okay, the rook, you know, takes care of that, you know, ahead of time, just protecting the bishop. So bishop up to f6. Morphy continues with the plan. And we have a pawn pushing forward, attacking the rook. So Morphy just picks off that material. So now Morphy is ahead by +1 in material, but plus 4.33. So basically Morphy is winning already. How does he go ahead and win? So this is something that going over these games, you know, especially the older games that are easier to understand, to see if an opponent has, well, any player or you, if you have a winning position, how do you continue the game and, you know, follow through and get that win if the game is still kind of close material wise? Well, let's see what Morphy does. He knocks out the bishop, which is a good strategy. If you're ahead in material, you want to trade off pieces. And then Morphy can use his extra pawn in the endgame to try and promote it and win. So capture. This also doubles these pawns. So the queenside pawn position of Anderson's is wrecked here. Doubled isolated pawns. So they are not looking too good. And now the queen jumps up here, adding more pressure, maybe getting ready to just trade off more material. So the king gets out of the pin, but Morphy just goes ahead and trades off material here. Now he just decides to stop because the rook is not going anywhere at the moment because it's pinned by the bishop here. So in the end game, what can you learn by this king marching up here? Well, when the pieces are dwindling down to nothing, and if there are no pieces on the board but pawns and kings, whoever's king is more active and up into the action is going to have the advantage. And so Morphy, knowing this, starts launching his king into the center of the board, and then he can see where he's going to need that king. He could target these isolated pawns over here. All right, the king gets out of that pin, so Morphy decides to just trade everything off here, get rid of all the pieces. And now if we look at this position, we have 6 pawns versus 5. Now usually if you have an extra pawn in an all pawn endgame, well, I don't know if I want to say usually, but often it'll be a win. That extra pawn can be pushed forward and promoted, unless the pawns are doubled up and they can't make any headway. But here we have 2 pawns versus 1 on the king side. So these pawns could press forward, and usually you want to push the unopposed pawn. So this pawn could start pressing forward. At some point, if this pawn moves up and they exchange, well, then you'll have a passed pawn over here, and the king will have to stop that. And then that could possibly give Morphy's king time to maneuver over and knock out these pawns and win with these pawns on the queen side. So the game continues a few moves more. Morphy pushes the unopposed pawn, and his opponent starts pressing forward here. Morphy just presses those pawns up the board, and this is an inaccuracy. Apparently, king to g6 would have been better. So Morphy centralizing his king, the best move, and we have this right here, pushing forward. So, what should Morphy do? He plays the best move here, apparently. Now, if he were to capture, this pawn could press forward. So let's take a look at this. This is pretty instructive. After this presses forward, if we have a capture, well then it looks like b4 would be the best move, because now the king cannot get up here as long as this pawn is covering here. So the king cannot move over here to pick this off, and both of these pawns are blocked by this single pawn. So all the action would be over here. But there's still a 2 versus 1 pawn majority. So back to the game. Morphy just pushes forward here, and now this is where the game ended, because this pawn cannot push forward or it'll be captured, and then we have a passed pawn running up the board. So how might the game continue here? Well, it looks like king to f8 is the number 1 recommended move, or king to f7, king to h6. So let's, try that move, king to h6. Well, then it looks like now the king can march over here and just pick these off. So king to d2 is the best move. King to g6. But, the king would march in here, pick these pawns off, and start pushing forward. And then this majority is a problem as well. At some point this pawn could push forward, but if the pawn pushes here and this pawn pushes up here, and the king tries to go around, well, then this passed pawn could start marching up the board. Okay, well, I hope this was an instructive game for you. Feel free to leave any comments. Definitely check out some Morphy games on your own. Maybe I'll do a few more in this series. But as I said, leave comments if you would like. Like and subscribe to support the channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.